Would you please introduce yourself?
Sure thing. My name is Lars Hedbor. I am the author of the Tales from a Revolution series, in which I explore in each of the books a different colony or future state, and really focus on telling the stories of ordinary people as they lived through and took part in that extraordinary time.
Lars, how did you get involved in this project? What interested you in the American Revolutionary period?
I got started because I have a friend who went to college in the Carolinas. So we were talking, and he kept referencing things that had happened in the Revolution in the Carolinas. And, I had never really heard of or thought about the Revolution in the South because everything you hear about down there is, of course, the Civil War. So I asked him for some recommendations for some good historical fiction set there. And the only thing that he could find was a book written by Jimmy Carter, who is an excellent poet. And about 100 pages into his book, I decided that, I utter those famous last words. I think I could do better myself. So I started out, again, right from the very beginning with the idea that I wanted to explore places that hadn't been well represented in fiction, and again, right from the first book, I knew I was going to write one for every colony at least, and with 17 books out now, I've gone beyond the original 13 by quite a bit. I still haven't written Delaware. That's coming this year, but I've done things like West Florida and Maine and Vermont and Nova Scotia, Bermuda. So,
as a former history teacher, what are you hoping to teach your readers about the colonies or about this particular era?
So the big thing that I really want people to understand is the role of the American Revolution in human history. There have been tons and tons of books written about the Civil War, and the Civil War is very important in American history. The American Revolution was a pivot point in all of human history, and I want people to really come away from my books with the understanding that it could not have happened without the contributions of ordinary people like you and me, who were muddling through, doing the best they could with what they had and what they knew, and that they ended up, whether by design or by purpose, or by accident, shaping the history that we now study as this is the way it had to be, right? Well, it didn't have to be that way. It could have turned out any number of different ways, and it was only through the efforts of truly extraordinary people who otherwise look just like all of us.
Could you please tell me about one or two of those people that you've highlighted in your novels who made a difference?
Sure. So my novels are historical fiction, so the events are absolutely real. The characters are largely of my own informed imagination. I have written about a few real people, one of whom was an ancestor of mine, and in the will, which I think I can lay hands on here. In this book, I write about Isaac Melker, who was one of the many sort of minor figures who he's literally a footnote in Washington's papers, but he served as a colonel during the Revolution. And he was his own worst enemy. He shows up first in the historical record, in the congressional record, where he was called before Congress to answer for having cussed out the president at a tavern. And, I found that fascinating. And then I found his will, which is where the title of the book comes from. And his will is another fascinating document because he makes very careful provisions for his nieces and his nephews and his brothers and his sisters, a little something for his lawyer, very nice bequest to the neighbor's son, nothing at all to his own son or to his wife. And so reaching out to a friend of mine who also writes the Revolution, I asked her, what do you make of this? And she said, well, I can think of three possibilities. One, he was a raging jerk, which, given his history with Congress, I can't completely rule that one out. Two, the wife was independently wealthy and didn't need it. If that was the case, I would expect to find some record of her owning property or something, and there's just nothing. Three, it wasn't his son and he knew it. That third premise, that third idea, is given further credence by the fact that the neighbor's son, to whom he left a nice bequest of land, adopts his surname on his death. As I said in the afterword on this, we did not invent, it's complicated.
Well, that is a remarkable story. John Adams, when talking about Tories and loyalists and revolutionaries, basically said that about 1/3 of the country actually were patriots, 1/3 were neither, and 1/3 were loyal to the crown.
Yep.
What, in your mind, brought the 1/3 that were patriots, brought them victory?
England was trying to defend a war on the very far end of a very, very long logistics chain. And I've seen some people who claim that all wars come down to logistics. And England was at a decided disadvantage there. The other thing was that the Patriots were operating on familiar ground. They knew the hills and valleys and nooks and crannies and were able to take advantage of that ground knowledge. And finally, I think a really large factor was that the Patriots were unafraid to break the rules. That we have many dispatches from very frustrated British officers about the Patriots, doing dastardly things like firing from cover and targeting officers and so forth. And that those things made a difference. But ultimately, the main reason I think that we won was because Great Britain had antagonized so many of the other nations of Europe that when it came down to it, they were all willing to pitch in and help us. So they distracted Britain all over the world, literally all over the planet, and caused America to be able to fight a more limited war than they might otherwise have had to.
Back to the Patriots a little bit.
Yeah.
You mentioned some characteristics that the British certainly didn't like about how they fought. Were there other personal characteristics that you found common to the Patriots at that time that are worth emphasizing?
I think the biggest thing was that the Patriots were accustomed to, England had followed a policy of what is commonly referred to as benign neglect. And the Patriots were accustomed to doing for themselves. And that extended not only to, most of their own needs, meeting their own needs as far as food and so forth is concerned, although there was a very large amount of import happening, but also basically minding their own affairs and controlling their own affairs. The fact that England was trying to take that away in the wake of the French and Indian War, the 7 Years' War, really, I think that is a large part of what motivated many of the Patriots.
Given the factors you've just discussed, do you think the American Revolution was inevitable?
I think that had the Crown, had Parliament answered the olive branch petition by saying, you know what, you're right, you deserve representation. There are as many of you over there as there are over here, and we need to recognize that fact instead of just ruling you from afar. I think they could have headed off the revolution as it unfolded. History also shows that, for example, Portugal, their seat of state moved from Portugal to Brazil for a while. So I think that the center of gravity for the British Empire might very well have shifted to New York from London at some point. It's a very interesting exercise in counterfactual imagination, and it's one that I know some writers have taken on. But given the fact that the Crown and Parliament were as inflexible as they were, if you can't change that, you don't get to change the revolution. I think it was going to happen.
Of the 17 volumes that you've written, do you have one that's your baby?
I do, actually. Yeah, let me grab that one. So The Freedman is one that I started writing. So I normally write in November. That's my deal with my wife, is she's a widow for the month of November, and the rest of the year she has me more or less. This one, I came across a news article in like March or April, and it was about a mayor in North Carolina who had done some genealogical research. Like many of us, he discovered in the course of that research that he had an ancestor who had fought on the American side in the Revolution. unlike most of us, that ancestor was a former slave. And I immediately said, okay, this is a story that must be told. And, obviously I'm not maybe the right person to tell it, but I think it's better that it be told than not told. And other people can follow me and do a better job of telling that story if they choose to. But as I started doing the research here, what I found was that the men who made that choice were choosing to fight for a society that was never going to grant them the liberties that they were fighting for. And I could only come up with two explanations for that. One was that they firmly believed that eventually those liberties would be granted to their descendants. And that work obviously continues today. Two, it's possible that they just believed so much in the underlying ideal that they were willing to lay their life down for it, even if they would never benefit from it themselves. So getting to tell this story was a tremendous privilege. And it is a story that inspires me personally. Just thinking about it gives me chills. The choices that those men made. So this is, if somebody asks me, what's the one I should start with, I would say The Freedman.
I agree. The great Ohio State football coach Woody Hayes spoke of paying forward.
Yes.
In The Freedman, your character, your ancestor, was paying forward, as are you in doing this. Thank you very much, Lars.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
A pleasure to talk to you, too.